good morning, and welcome to the Africa Weekly Talk. Today's subject on the jacket is, will Africa ever be free and independent from foreign interventions in Africa's socio-economic and political development in the 21st century? It saddens me when I have to do programs centered on military as well as political instabilities that is going on in Africa today. But unfortunately, that is what has to be talked about. And we have to ask ourselves questions about where we are going as a continent, whether we are moving forward or we are moving backwards. There has been some progress in the last 20, 30 years in most African countries. But it's become clear that when we take a step forward, we also have to take some steps back. And this is in reference to what is happening in Sudan today. Sudan, as we all know currently, is in a semi-civil war. And there's a power-grabbing situation going on right now between two generals. One from the Rapid Support Forces, which is the RSF, and the other from the Sudanese Armed Forces. And all these two generals came under the government of Bashir, Mohammed al-Bashir, who was overthrown by the people. He was forced out by the people of Sudan through protests and all that stuff. And eventually, he had to leave. And when they set up this transitional government, which was supposed to eventually bring about democratic elections and, elect a democratic government, there came the military, who also stepped in again. And now Sudan is in a position where there are two generals from different factions of their military fighting for power. Fellows, this situation going on in Sudan is what has been hampering the growth and development and destabilizing the African continent. I can go back to 1991, Mohammed Siad Barre, who was then the head of state of Somalia. He had come to power from 1969 all the way to 1991. And it was militias in Somalia that stood up and overthrew Siad Barre. And out of that infighting, that civil war that took place in 1991 in Somalia, Somalia has never been the same up to this day. It's a failed state, as we all know. And then you look at Somalia, which is at the Horn of Africa, eastern part of Africa, and then look and you see Ethiopia. And we have the situation right now going on with the Tigray war with the Ethiopian government also going on right now. And then right next to Ethiopia is Sudan. And then right behind, underneath Sudan is Chad. Then you have Mali. So if you look at the geopolitical positioning of these countries and the eastern and northeastern part of Africa, and you look at what is going on right now in Sudan, we as Africans have to be very, very, very concerned about the situation. Because what is happening in Sudan right now can really turn Sudan into Somalia if something is not done to have a peaceful resolution to the problem going on in Sudan. But this is a power-grabbing infighting between generals. And this goes down to the al-Bashir government. And what is happening right now is basically based on, in my assumption, is based on the fact that each one of these factions wants to be the one in charge of the country in order for them not to transition to a civilian government. That is all this is about. This is not about transitioning from al-Bashir's dictatorial government to a civilian government as promised by the interim government a couple of years ago when al-Bashir was overthrown. This is about the military trying to exert its power again on the people of Sudan. And unfortunately, What is happening in Sudan right now has the footprints of other countries involved, some from the Middle East and some from Africa as well. And out of that, that is where this becomes like a, what do you call it? This puts like a proxy war that is going on between these factions, which are being supported by foreign governments from neighboring countries and some from the Middle East as well. And this is what makes this fighting in Sudan very, very dangerous. Because at the end of the day, as far as you have these foreign governments interfering in the internal affairs of the governance of Sudan, this thing can become just like another failed state. And you look at the north of Sudan and northwest of Sudan is what? Libya right there. And Libya is already a failed state. We all know it. When Gaddafi was overthrown. So if you look at the geopolitical position of these countries that I just mentioned, then you have to see clearly that what is happening in Sudan is a very, very, very serious situation in Africa today. Because this thing can cause very serious problems to the African socio-economic development and also create instability within the region. Because it's going to create it. It's going to happen. With all the problems that is going on around those areas right now, it is bound to happen. And the question that I have is this. Why that we as Africans, ever since the independence of African countries starting from the 20th century, around the 1940s with Egypt and then Ghana and following on with so many other African countries, why as of today that I'm speaking, 21st century, Africa is still in the same old problems of instabilities caused by military governments because of greed by its power structures, by its leaders and governments. And out of that, it has created so much poverty and mayhem to its citizens. And unfortunately, what is happening in Sudan right now can be traced back to the days of independence in the 20th century, when great leaders of Africa were all overthrown with the help, and some cases, being sponsored by foreign governments, the CIA of the United States and the British intelligence, And these things happened because at that time, when Africans became independent, a lot of European countries as well as America saw Africa's independence, especially with the leaders that the Africans at that time had elected democratically into offices, as a threat to the Western countries' way of life, especially when it comes to the mineral resources that they had depended on, that they have been able to control because of colonization. And now all of a sudden you have these independent African countries that have to make decisions on their own as to who to trade with, who to sell what to, and all that stuff. So from the very get-go of Africa's independence, the Western world already always had their eyes on the African continent and its governments. And we all know what happened. Almost every African independent country's leader was overthrown or killed. And most of these things happened with the influence and with the support of Western countries. And it is known now. This is not a hidden history or hidden stuff that people can say that, oh, it didn't happen. It's known, especially with the American classification of most of the CIA files. It is known. The coups that the CIA sponsored in almost all the African countries that it helped overthrow their leaders, like Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, all of that, all are declassified, except some very, very key sensitive areas that are still classified. Most of the documents are available. And so we all know the role that the CIA played in destabilizing Africa. But the question is not about the role that the CIA played. Most African leaders at that time knew about it. They knew what the CIA was doing. They knew that the CIA did not have any good intentions for the independent African countries. Kwame Nkrumah knew about it. He wrote about it. He talked about it. And as a matter of fact, he even questioned when Ghana's first Black American ambassador, Franklin Williams, who was sent to Ghana the very year, about 3 months before Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown. In Kwame Nkrumah's papers that he wrote, he questioned why America, a country that at that time did not believe in allowing blacks and had legal segregation, would send a black man to Ghana as an ambassador. Kwame Nkrumah wrote about it. And he questioned that because they had always sent white people to as ambassadors to other countries and all that stuff. But why would they send a black man to Ghana? For him to come and do their dirty work for them. And Franklin Williams himself, in his own, some of his writings also talked about what he was sent there to do. So these are all known facts now. But the problem I have with our African leaders today is that because of the selfishness and the greed and the corruption that exists on the African continent today, we are not there to build a country or a continent to help our own citizens and people. The African governments that we have right now, as I'm speaking, is all about selfish and greed by their corrupt leaders. That's all it is. It is not about building a great continent or countries for the citizens that they govern. And that is the sad part of it. So if I'm saying that will Africa ever be free from foreign governments and intervention in its socio-economic and political development, it seems to me that we will never be free. As far as we have leaders who are selfish and corrupt, who look up to foreign governments in terms of aid and stability, in a way of them coming in and stabilizing their government to protect them from their citizens altering their grievances or protesting or fighting for their civil rights and freer economic and socio-economic development and all that stuff in their various African countries. They will always need these foreign governments who will prop them up with arms in a way of protecting them in their governments and in their various African countries. As far as you have that, Africa will never be independent. As far as I'm concerned, Africa has never been independent for the past 200 years and will never be. And like I stated earlier, right now, if you look at what is happening in Sudan, and if you look at the geopolitical positioning of Sudan and Ethiopia, Mali, Chad, Libya, and look around all these countries, what do you see? These are all countries that have civil situations going on in these countries. And with the situation in Sudan right now going on, it's scary. It's very, very scary. Because if Sudan is not able to have a peaceful resolution, I don't know what is going to happen. This thing will disintegrate. And it's going to, because at the end of the day, you have these Islamists. And most of these Sudanese governments believe in Islamist governments. And a lot of them are being sponsored by foreign governments in the Middle East. And this has created a lot of division within Sudan. And as far as you have that, and then you have Libya sitting at the top, which is also being sponsored by some Middle East countries. So at the end of the day, what is going to happen is this thing might end up creating a very serious problem for the people of Sudan. This thing might become just like Somalia. And the question is, what is the role of the African Union? What is the role of the African Union? I've always not believed in the African Union because I believe the African Union is just as corrupt as the African governments in most African countries anyway. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the founding fathers of the Organization of the African Union, which was OAU, which was led by Kwame Nkrumah and Haile Selassie and NASA and all those people back then. And then they decided to change the name from OAU to AU because of what European Union and all that stuff. And you look at the current leadership, for the past 30, 40, 50 years of the AU or the OAU, especially the AU, you can tell clearly that that organization is just as corrupt as the various African governments in Africa. I mean, anytime you have an organization that is supposed to represent the continent, I mean, it's supposed to represent the continent of Africa, but it's being financed by another continent organization, I mean, give me a break. I mean, what are you talking about? How are you going to have an organization that is supposed to represent a continent, which is the AU, being financed by the European Union? I mean, come on. You are never going to be independent. You are never going to be independent when you have your key organization being financed by another continent's organization. That means the influence of that continent is still going to be on you. And that is what the AU is. The AU is just a useless organization, just like the most governments in Africa. They are not that much different from them. They are all corrupt. You know? I remember about a couple of months ago, or last year, when they had a meeting with the Biden administration in Washington, D.C. I remember when they came down here, being fancied with some fancy hotels in Washington, D.C. and all that stuff. And these people are just as corrupt as the leaders of most of these African countries. At the end of the day, that is what they do. It has nothing to do with building a better Africa. It has more to do with what they can get for themselves. And who are the leaders of the African Union? These same presidents of various African countries. And look at these, your various presidents of your various African countries, and look at them, and you can tell if that is the representative of the African Union, then there's no wonder. That is how the AU is. So the AU, basically, to me, but there are questions going on, people asking about what can the AU do to stop the situation in Sudan. AU sits, where is the headquarters of the AU? It's in Ethiopia. And look what is happening in Ethiopia. The Tigray war in Ethiopia. The civil abuses in Ethiopia. And all that stuff is going on right there. So at the end of the day, the organization is just useless. Let's face it. I mean, that's a useless organization. It's just in the name of forming an organization called AU. That AU that we have now is not like the same as the OAU that was founded, led by Kwame Nkrumah and Haile Selassie and the rest in the late 60s. It's not the same. That's what we have to understand. Those people were convicted leaders with conviction. They believed in Africa. They believed and had pride in Africa. Now the current leaders of Africa have no pride and they don't believe in it. They are just there for their own selfish interests. That's why they are there. What they can get, the bucks they can get. That is why the AU that we see, like I said, stated earlier, cannot be a serious organization when you cannot fund your own organization within your continent. Are you kidding me? I mean, give me a break. A whole continent with all this natural resources, with all this wealth underneath this continent. If you cannot fund your own organization, but you have to look forward to some European Union to help fund your organization, then you are not serious. You are not a serious organization. I mean, just imagine African Union funding the European Union. I mean, how can the European Union fund your organization and then you don't expect the European Union to have influence on the policies and the decisions that are made by your organization? At the end of the day, anybody who sponsors you, regardless of what they are sponsoring, will have influence on you. It's that simple. I mean, this is basic, simple logic. Anytime somebody finances you, they are giving you money, food, definitely they will have influence on you, your way you think, what to think, and how to think. And that is what the AU is. So when people are asking questions of what can the AU do with regards to the situation going on in Sudan, it's unfortunate. Look at everything that has been going on in Africa for the past 30 years, especially with this new influx of civil wars and Islamic threats with Boko Haram and all that stuff at the Sahel region and all that stuff. All they need now is mainly what? The US government and other European government coming in to help them. because they don't have a good structured organization to make decisions to help solve problems internally. And that is very, very sad. It's not supposed to be like this. The African Union is supposed to be an organization that's supposed to help solve problems in Africa. But they cannot solve problems in Africa because they are all useless. And at the end of the day, they are not, I mean, in the position for them to make decisions to help Africa without looking at the interest of their foreign sponsors. As far as you are looking at the interest of your foreign sponsors, you cannot make decisions to help the continent that you are supposed to represent. Because you are semi-representing Africa and semi-representing the interest of Europe, the EU. That's what it is, as well as with China, because China also helps them with finances. So basically, Africa, to me, like I stated earlier with the question, will Africa ever be independent? Africa has never been independent for the past 200 years. Africa had never been independent, and I don't think Africa will be independent, because as far as you have African governments and African organizations dependent on foreign governments and foreign institutions and foreign unions to finance projects and to finance the existence of these AU and all that stuff in Africa, Africa will never be independent. That's the saddest part of it. That's the fact. It's never going to be independent as far as we have that. But that is what we live in right now. So right now we have all these problems that is going on in Sudan, which is very unfortunate, because you're looking at it and then you're looking at African students, you're looking at various Nigerian students, as well as Cameroon students, and some people coming from Egypt and Ethiopia, and all these students trying to get out of Sudan, even trying to evacuate foreign nationals from Sudan. It's also even a problem with most African countries right now. I mean, other African countries are closing their borders, not allowing foreign citizens from Africa to use their countries to migrate back to their various African countries. That's even become a problem right now in Africa. So looking at all of this, that tells you exactly where the continent is. It's unfortunate, but that's the saddest of it, but that's the truth. But anyway, so I'll keep you guys updated on this issue. But if it's Sunday, it's the Africa Weekly Talk. God bless you guys and have a great week. Peace and love.